And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Kenya to kick us off. And then just some general housekeeping. I know that we're in a regular Zoom meeting format, so please keep yourself muted unless we get to the Q&A portion. And if you're not sure how to mute, I can help you mute yourself. But yeah, I'm going to pass it to Kenya to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those who don't know, I am Kenya Whitaker, and I am a movement lawyer at DC Justice Lab, where our mission is to create a safer, freer, and more equal DC community. I am also the lead on the reparations campaign here at DCJL. So, again, thank you for joining me to celebrate DC Emancipation Day, which was officially yesterday, which abolished or celebrates the abolishment of slavery in Washington, D.C. And we are here to discuss reparations and the pending reparations bill in the D.C. Council. So before I provide a brief background on reparations and the reparations bill, I would like to first let our collaborators, the Washington Bar Association Young Lawyers Division, give some opening remarks. So thank you. If they are here to give remarks. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So if not, we can move.
Hi, Kenya. Sorry, that
Oh,
would be.
okay. It's okay. Hi, Jasmine. Thank you.
So first of all, I just want to thank thanks everyone for being on here. I think this is an amazing event, and the Washington Bar Association Young Lawyers Division is really proud to be able to partner with this organization for this webinar celebrating and looking at DC Emancipation Day. So looking forward to hearing great remarks and just the discussion that's getting ready to happen. So thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jasmine. I really appreciate that. So before we get into the excellent speakers that we have today to discuss the reparations bill that is currently pending, I would first like to define what reparations are. So reparations are an act or process of making amends for a wrong. And according to the United Nations, 5 conditions must be met for full reparations, which consist of cessation, assurances and guarantees of non-repetition of the harmful act or wrong. You have restitution and repatriation. You have compensation. You have satisfaction, and you have rehabilitation. So, a little history about the DC Reparations Bill. The Reparations Task Force and Establishment Act of 2023 was reintroduced in the Business and Economic Development Committee by CM, which stands for Councilmember Kenya McDuffie, last year, 2023. This is the third time a bill regarding studying reparations has been introduced, but great news, there have been more co-sponsors this time around than ever before. So can we get some claps? Yay! So out of 13 council members, 9 plus Councilmember McDuffie have co-sponsored this bill, which shows great support that reparations are needed in Washington, D.C. In June of 2023, over 100 community members advocated and signed up to testify to the importance of this bill at the first ever hearing in the district on reparations. Can you believe that? The first ever hearing on reparations in D.C. took place last June, which also is significant because during June, there is a celebration of Juneteenth.
Juneteenth, yes.
The
Yes.
bill aims to create a 9-member task force to study and provide recommendations on reparations for Native Black Washingtonians and residents. And as a native of the DMV area, specifically PG County, I am proud to host such an insightful event. And today you are in for a real treat because we have 3 excellent speakers who will walk through DC's history, the significance of DC Emancipation Day, and the reparations bill. We ask that everyone, please remain on mute while this discussion occurs. Nana, you included. There will be a.
Nana.
Okay, Nana, you can reach yourself now.
But I am muted. I'm
No, you're
muted.
not. We can hear you. I'm so excuse me, y'all. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so you can type your questions in the chat as the discussion is happening, and Maya, who spoke earlier, will keep track of the questions, or you can wait until the end to raise your hand, come off of mute, and then ask your question. And shouts out to Ronnie because he says make space for Nana, which I always do and I always will. So we love you, Nana. So let's get started. Okay, so our first speaker is Corey Shaw Jr., who has a very lengthy bio to be so young, but Corey Shaw Jr. is a DC native with lifelong roots in Ward 7. As a graduate of both Anacostia Senior High School and the University of the District of Columbia, go Firebirds, woo-hoo, Shaw has a passion for comprehending the needs of communities and helping them advocate and mobilize for structural change. Corey, let me not mispronounce your name. Corey first got his start working with communities in Washington, D.C. as the co-founder of the Black Broad Branch Project. In his capacity as an oral historian and chair of the Policy Implementation Working Committee, Shaw has advocated for reparations for two families whose ancestors were displaced from Chevy Chase, D.C. in 1928. He continues to support the project, engaging with descendants to mobilize a coalition of scholars, DC residents, and community organizations toward the goals of acknowledgement, compensation, and education. With the collective efforts of the coalition, the Black Broad Branch Project has succeeded in constructing educational curriculum for 3rd, 6th, and 12th grade students in DCPS, testified before the DC City Council, and presented in many forms ranging from the realm of academia to the United Nations. So yes, Corey is international. Ain't that right, Corey? His passion for reparations drove him to join the African American Redress Network, where he continues to assist with local level reparations efforts across the United States as the volunteer director of community engagement and strategic planning. And after that, I need a sip of water because, like I said, that bio was lengthy. So, Corey, the first question that I have for you is nationwide trends. Before specifically getting into DC, how are reparations moving nationally?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that I'd like to start, I guess, by acknowledging the absolute swath of bills across the country at the state and local level that are advancing. California, I think, being sort of the hallmark example of a reparations task force that's sort of come together and done some work. Evanston, Illinois being the first successful municipal level reparations effort in the country, ushering in housing grants for Evansonians who had been harmed or whose ancestors had been harmed by racial discrimination in housing. On another level, I think, and this is the layer that I like to sort of bring to folks, is that we see and we talk a lot about the municipal level and the state level efforts going on. Detroit, for example, New York now. What we don't hear a lot about is the actual communities working without government support to achieve reparations. So these are communities like Brown Grove, Virginia, Africatown, Alabama, being the landing site of the last ship of enslaved people in the United States. Harris Neck, Georgia, which suffered land loss as a result of the DoD, the Department of Defense, saying during World War II that there were German U-boats off the coast of Georgia, which there's some evidence of, right? But they use that sort of extrapolation to take land, hundreds of acres, saying they were going to build a naval base. They never built the naval base and instead turned it into a wildlife refuge, right? And refused to give the land back. And so, in addition to the state and municipal level efforts that are advancing actual legislation, there are communities that are mobilizing similarly to the way that we're doing in DC with the Black Broad Branch Project, where descendants are coming together with organizers, with activists, with other organizations, and trying to build a movement for reparations. And so I think that there's, for me, degrees of separation between where exactly the legacy lies here. I think that the true legacy of the fight lies with those grassroots organizers on the ground working with descendants, right? This movement has always been one that has been led by the descendants of harmed people and those that have been impacted. Beyond that, the issue of task force and commissions and things of that nature are prescient in this particular moment because for so long, the nation itself has refused to take up the issue of HR 40 in any meaningful way. And so what we're watching sort of take place right now across the country is states and localities saying, well, you know what, we don't really need HR 40, right? We can do this work without the federal government. And in fact, right, the argument that people like myself would make, right, is that these local and municipal level efforts, they bolster the case for federal reparations because the research has been done, right? HR 40, I'll remind folks, is a commission. It is not a mandate to create a reparations program or processes. Right, it is a commission. And so what states and localities are doing is building the case. So when we finally do get to a moment where someone feels like taking up the issue of HR 40, hopefully we don't have to have this conversation about, oh, we're going to set up a commission and the federal government's going to study its role in, for example, the Tulsa massacres, right? They're going to cover the role of the federal government when it comes to housing discrimination and redlining and racially restrictive covenants, right? We don't need to have that conversation anymore, right? We've done the work. We know, right? I'd argue we know now. We're entertaining it in a particular way right now as a matter of appeasing a system, right? And so I think for me, that's where the national conversation is currently. There's all sorts of other conversations we could have about lineage and XYZ and so on and so forth that I'll sort of preserve for another question.
Thank you so much. And I like what you said about the local levels are taking up that role, and the grassroots organizations are saying, look, we're not going to wait for the federal government. We're going to do it ourselves. And so you mentioned Evanston, Illinois. Do you mind speaking briefly about Evanston and why that city is so unique?
Yeah, I mean, Evanston is a place not too unlike DC in that there was some redlining that took place in DC. Evanston, I think, is sort of the hallmark of what redlining looked like across the country. You have lots of evidence of racially restrictive zoning in sort of in lockstep with redlining. Redlining being the practice of designating particular areas, hint, hint, those areas where Black and brown folk lived, as not worthy of home loans, right? And sort of making it harder to buy homes in particular areas and easier to buy homes in certain areas where the sort of establishment wanted Black people to live. And so that was the history of Evanston for a really, really long time. It was the historical research done by a lot of people, but sort of in sort of lockstep with the Shorefront Legacy Center in Evanston that uncovered the role of Harlan Bartholomew in the zoning process and the redlining process as well. There's also the HOAs, not HOA, the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and the Fair Housing Act, which sort of backfired in retrospect. But those two particular bills and agencies paired with redlining and the work of Harlan Bartholomew is what built the case for reparations in Evanston. And so the successful effort in Evanston, as I mentioned before, was housing grants to descendants of people who had been impacted by racially restrictive housing practices in the past. And those, I think, weren't necessarily unrestricted funds, but like they could be used to repair a house. They could be used to buy a house for first-time home buyers, right? And as a matter of like eligibility, right? You just as a note for sort of the reparations heads in the space, you haven't heard race-based or lineage, right? What you heard was people that are impacted by a particular harm, right? And so I think that one, Evanston's onto something in that case. But I also think that as it relates to what exactly they achieved, I won't sort of pretend to speak for the legendary former Alderwoman Robin Wood Simmons, but if you spoke to her, if you've listened to her New York Times interview that she did when the bill passed and the program sort of got started, the thing that she noted was this is one thing, right? Kenya, you listed a number of things that sort of constitute reparations in the National Human Rights Framework, right? In order to achieve reparations, right, you don't get to just sort of cut the check and call it a day, right? You cut the check, you know, do the apology, do the acknowledgement, do the restitution, the repatriation, things of those nature. So, yeah.
Right. Thank you for that. And for those who don't know, shouts out to Robin Rue Simmons, a Black woman who was the Fifth Ward alderman from 2017, I believe, to 2021, if I'm not mistaken. But she is the reason why Evanston became the first U.S. city to administer reparations. So our next question for you, Corey, or my next question is, what is the significance of DC Emancipation Day and its relationship to reparations? Because DC Emancipation Day was yesterday, there was festivities over the weekend, and we're celebrating the end of slavery in the district, but there's more to it than just that. So do you mind speaking about that?
Yeah, I was reminded yesterday, as a matter of like kismet, that it was April 16th, a Tuesday in 1862, as Tuesday was yesterday, or was the 16th,
Yes.
that uh, enslavers were paid, I think, about $300 or $350 per enslaved person for the people that they owned, right? The people that they regarded as property, and that is how emancipation came to the district. Um, that is, just for context, 3 years prior to the end of the Civil War and 6 years prior to citizenship for those formerly enslaved people, right? And so for six likely long and grueling years, Black folk lived in DC as manumitted people, right? Emancipated people, but not as full citizens, right? And so that is why that sort of period of 1862 to 1868, for my historians in the sort of virtual room here, you know that the sort of moment of emancipation in DC is muddled with sharecropping, XYZ, and CYX, sort of recreations of the chattel enslavement system. The sort of notion here that I think I really want to harp on, though, is that here is a moment on April 16th, 1862, where not only have Black people been set free and manumitted and so on, white enslavers got paid reparations. Right? They were paid reparations for the loss of what they regarded to be property, right? And so it is not lost on me that on yesterday, in this moment where everyone's sort of celebrating emancipation, not very many people were talking about the fact that here we are having conversations about reparations for Black folk. Here we are having conversations about whether or not this is possible, whether or not it can be done, when we did it. Generations before Japanese internment reparations were paid, we did it for white enslavers in Washington, D.C. And so for the naysayers that sort of say that reparations is a moot issue, or the issue of enslavement, or Jim Crow for that matter, is so far removed from the reality of today, it really isn't, for one, right? It was 60, not even 60, it was 1970s when some schools in this country were desegregated, right? It was in the 50s when DC schools are desegregated by a matter of Supreme Court case in Bowling v. Sharp, right? And so it was not that long ago that the city was segregated. I remind people consistently that spaces like Southeast Washington used to be segregated white communities as far back as the 60s, right? And so it's not that we're not that far removed from the histories of enslavement, Jim Crow, housing discrimination, so on and so forth. And so these conversations that we're having about reparations are incredibly pressing to the moment that we're in this city's history, right? In this moment, we're sort of struggling with a budget crisis. We're also struggling with how to take care of those people who are most in need, who by design are poor and Black, brown people in the district who predominantly live in wards 5, 7, and 8. Right. And so in this moment, we're sort of celebrating and we're acknowledging the importance of emancipation. I would like to drive home for folks that this is also a moment where, one, you can get involved in a lot of movements to advance reparations, right? There's the DC Reparations Coalition that does fantastic work. Shout out to Ronnie and all my coalition members on the call. I see you. But also, coming out and supporting the work of the DC Justice Lab, organizations like Empower DC, the Greater Washington Community Foundation, right? Show up and show love to the people who are fighting for emancipation in its fullest form, right? Understand that this sort of moment that we're living in, while yes, civil rights acts were passed in XYZ and ZYX, those exist within the confines of a system that did not want us to be here in the first place, right? The sort of 14th Amendment is a race-based remedy, and yet the Supreme Court wants to talk about it as if it isn't, right? And so let's sort of acknowledge that we have work to do. There's been lots of important work done. There is still lots of important work to do.
I know that's right. And Ronnie, I think he said it for all of us. He asked, "Why is Corey so fire?" Because Corey, you just spoke a word right there. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate that. We're coming back to you, Corey. So keep that momentum. Our next speaker is Dr. Tanya, who is the executive director of the University of California, Washington Center. She is the founder of the Racism, Capitalism, and the Law Lab, and a professor of sociology at the University of California. Mercer, excuse me. She has spent her scholarly career working to understand why racial and economic disparities exist, how racism intersects with capitalism, and how our legal system oppose these inequities. She is the author of over 50 academic articles and 6 books. Her latest book, based on research funded by the National Science Foundation, is Before Gentrification: The Creation of DC's Racial Wealth Gap. So thank you, Tanya, or should I say Dr. Tanya, for showing up and having this conversation with us today. You are doing important work as well, and you wrote this great book. So I want to know, how does your work illustrate the harms perpetuated against Black Washingtonians?
Thank you, Kenya, for that question. And good afternoon, everyone. But the history of Black people in DC is one of dispossession, displacement, and disinvestment. So in one example, Elizabeth Proctor Thomas, a free Black woman, was one of dozens of Black people who owned property in DC's Brightwood neighborhood prior to the Civil War. And in September 1861, Union troops appropriated her land. So the appropriation of Elizabeth Proctor Thomas's land was not an exception. The city and private developers worked together to eradicate nearly all the Black communities established in Northwest DC in the 19th century. Formerly enslaved people and their descendants went to great lengths to purchase land and home in DC, only to have their property taken from them over and over again through eminent domain. So insofar as we think about reparations in terms of cases of individuals, appropriations in DC, there's lots of cases. Developers, white citizen associations, and government officials work together to remove Black people from DC neighborhoods and create all white communities. In Reno City and on Meridian Hill, the city used eminent domain to build parks and schools serving whites only. In Brightwood, the Federal Housing Administration financed new all-white subdivisions. In Southeast, the Housing Authority used slum clearance and urban renewal policies to level the homes of Black people. In Navy Yard, the Housing Authority used these policies to replace the residences in this integrated working class neighborhood with segregated public housing for Black residents only. And in Berry Farm, they use these same powers to remove Black homeowners and create public housing. And in Capitol View, private developers built homes for middle-class residents. And then the Housing Authority constructed public housing projects in the heart of this middle-class Black community. In each of these cases, anti-Black local and federal policies led to the displacement and dispossession of Black families. In contrast, these same policies led to the enrichment of white families. Government subsidized home ownership alongside public investments in white neighborhoods translated into intergenerational wealth for white people. In white neighborhoods, the homes consistently increased in value, and these neighborhoods featured well-funded schools as well as employment opportunities. So the public and private investments in white neighborhoods enriched white residents. But these logics of racial capitalism did not work the same in Black DC neighborhoods, where homeownership often did not translate into intergenerational wealth. Public authorities failed to invest in public schools once these schools became majority Black. And when crack cocaine swept across the city, further devastating Black communities, the primary government response was carceral instead of supportive. And today, Black residents are being displaced from neighborhoods that are just now experiencing revitalization and private reinvestment. So the history of Black communities is one of dispossession, displacement, and disinvestment. And this is what we could address through reparations.
Okay, doctor. I see. I don't know if you see Ronnie's face. The reason why I was laughing because he's like, okay, you fire. You just did a freestyle bar. So as your research relates to displacement and Black people losing wealth instead of gaining wealth, how does it relate to reparations in your own words? Like, what is needed to repair this specific harm or specific harms?
I mean, there's so many ways that you could approach this. There's so many instances of displacement, of dispossession. So you could research each of those cases. But I think the general thing I want to make a point of is that public policies created the racial wealth gap in DC, and public policies can eliminate the racial wealth gap in DC. Like the city took land from Black families, so the city could give land to Black families. The city and the federal government invested millions of dollars in white neighborhoods, and that has created trillions of dollars of wealth for white people. So they could do the same. The city and the federal government could invest in Black communities and therefore create millions or trillions of dollars of wealth for Black families. The city and the federal government invested billions of dollars in the war on drugs, which absolutely devastated Black communities in DC. And there's opportunity to change course and invest similarly heavily but in ways and uplift these communities instead of punish them.
Wow, that was great. And in the great words of Lauren Hill, it could all be so simple, right? But as you can see, we are here and we are fighting. And I appreciate you again for doing this research and fighting in this fight and coming to this webinar and advocating for the reparations bill. And just like I told Corey, I will be back with you as well. So stay put. Our next speaker is Ronnie Galvin, or just Ronnie, who is the facilitator for the DC Reparations Coalition. And he's also the founder of Communivation. So over the course of 20 years, Ronnie has designed and implemented a wide range of practical community engagement strategies for the purpose of learning, establishing networks grounded in the practices of mutual support and accountability, and alignment for collaborative action. And Ronnie is also a reverend. Did you want me to? Did you want me to acknowledge you as Rev or no?
However you see fit. I follow.
Okay. We have speakers that have a lot of titles because they're very well experienced and they're experts. So come on, Reverend Ronnie, come on, you're gonna preach to us today.
You want me to line a hymn for you? You want me to
Come
line up
on,
a
I
hymn
want
for
to
you?
hear it. You got a hymn for us. Okay. So, as a member of the DC Reparations Coalition, what advocacy is taking place to support the bill and bring more attention to the reparations movement?
Thank you very much, Kenya. And I just want to begin by, first of all, celebrating your wonderful facilitation
Okay.
thus far. And Patrice, you and the team at DC Justice Lab. I see folks on from IF, Josh, maybe others on from IF, a Foundation for Radical Possibility. It's just wonderful doing work with folks who are willing to roll up their sleeves. Sometimes we got to fight each other, right? But it's because we believe in the liberation and reparation of Black people, which essentially will lead to the reparation of everyone. And so thank y'all for that. I would be remiss also as a man of spirit if we didn't recognize the people who came before us who have been doing this work. So Mother Callie House, Queen Mother Audley Moore, of course, the Honorable John Conyers who introduced HR 40, Randall Robinson, a host of folks, sheroes and heroes whose names we do not know, but who did the work so that we could do the work we're doing today. So we give thanks for them. And to answer your question directly, there's a lot going on that we don't know. Let's just be clear about that. There are people, as Corey said, working at the grassroots, underneath the grassroots, who are working in various ways on reparative justice in the district. And the coalition really has given us, the DC Reparations Coalition has given us an opportunity to create a space to bring those groups together, to elevate the discussion and the fight around reparations, and specifically to pass this bill to establish the task force. I can name a few folks. DC is fortunate to have some of the stalwarts of the national organization in COBRA, the National Coalition for Blacks for Reparation. Some of those folks are a part of our coalition. DMV Freedmen. They are also, I think Kelly Matthews is on the call. They are also a part of the coalition, and both of them doing work in the city to organize residents, engaged in political education, socializing the idea of reparative justice. I think Corey mentioned Empower DC with the work they're doing. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention again DC Justice Lab, who in many ways is serving as a type of maestro, trying to get all of us into the sandbox so that we are a strong coalition pushing for reparations in the district. My hope is that as we continue to do our work, Kenya, we can continue to see, support, and amplify all of the groups that are working for reparations in the district, and continue to build a base of power that makes particularly now, this reparations bill a reality.
Great. Thank you for that. So my next question, Ronnie, and we've been meeting and discussing, and we're doing the background work, and we know the debates that people have about reparations. We see, I saw your face. You're like, yeah, we know the debates. We know what people are saying against it, for it. So can you provide a little context on what debates are occurring specifically in DC about this reparations bill?
Such a great question. And one other shout out I want to give, you asked the question about who's working on reparations. Most of the groups that I named are organizing, grassroots, agitational, aspirational groups, but we do actually have a foundation in the city that is working on reparations. If a Foundation for Radical Possibilities has put out a report
You did.
calling philanthropy to task and their role in creating harm in Black communities and their opportunity to participate in the reparations fight. And so before we get off the call, I'm sure we can share their report. But the debates and the conversations. So there are many, right? And as Professor Tanya said, we've got to negotiate these things. We'll talk about the task force and its importance here in a second. But at the top, whenever reparations comes up, one of the first things that comes up is, well, how are we going to pay for that? Right. And so, and right now, as we are working to push the bill supporting the creation of the task force, we're starting to hear the early rumblings from all kinds of corners about how are we going to pay for it. So that's always a big one. And what we often say back is, y'all figured out how to pay for extracting from the lives and communities of Black folks. Professor, you just said this so eloquently. I'm going to say it with a little colloquialism, right? Y'all figured out how to pay for that. Y'all can figure out how to pay for the harm. I mean, for the repair. So anyway, so that's one big debate. The other one is how much is it going to cost, right? And so we've seen a lot in the national conversation about what reparations, just the financial part. Now, mind you, the 5-point definition that you gave from the UN includes some other aspects, but you know, that number is from 10 to 14 trillion, depending on who you talk to. That's a number we're going to have to figure out in DC. And it's probably likely that in DC, let's just say you'll never be able to pay the amount based on the harm that was done. But that's a big debate. The one that's probably most energetic, that's the word I'll use, is who gets reparations, right? And it's
Are you sure you want to go into that now? Do we have enough time? Because
well,
you know,
I'm not going to go into it, but it's a worthy debate. It really is a worthy debate. And Corey named all the places around the country where there are local reparations efforts, and in every single one, this question of, well, who actually gets reparations? And it generally falls along the lines of people who can trace their lineage back to someone who was enslaved, versus all Black people. And it is a debate that we are going to have as a district, but it is probably the most energetic of all of the conversations, particularly amongst the people who stand to maybe benefit directly from reparations. Just a couple of more debates. One that is unique to DC, and it's not really a debate. I think it's going to be an exploration. So clearly, the city is hopefully potentially on the hook for reparations. But because the DC operated so long under the auspices of the federal government, there's a claim that DC can make that no other jurisdiction in the country can make. We can actually make a double claim, potentially, right? A claim on the federal government, who was creating harm in the lives of Black folks before there was a local government, and then, of course, the local government. And then the last two are related to reparations for what? So reparations for, is it just for slavery, right? Which in itself is enough harm, trust me, right? But then there's also mass incarceration, there's over-policing of neighborhoods, underfunding schools, gentrifying neighborhoods, right, Professor? Like there's just this laundry list of harms and traumas that have been exacted on Black people and Black communities. So there's going to be a conversation, a big debate about that. And then Professor, one for you that I'd love to talk to you about either here or offline is what does reparations look like inside of the very same system that created the harm that Black people have experienced? What does reparations look like inside of the system of racial capitalism? Right. And how do we, if reparations comes in all of its forms, how do we actually make sure that the next version of Douglas Blackman called it slavery by another name? How do we make sure that that doesn't happen again so that in a generation or two, all of the work that we did with repair gets morphed and transferred back into the empire that actually has been designed to kill Black people? So anyway, so those are some of the big debates, and we'll talk more about like why we need a task force to help us figure this out.
Exactly. Okay, preach, preacher. I like that. Y'all, he's being this is toned down, Ronnie, by the way, and he's still on fire. So just to let you know. And I wanted to go back to the debate about who deserves reparations. And I'm not trying to be messy here, but I heard somewhere in one of the meetings that they said Barack Obama doesn't deserve it. So Barack, if you're watching this, I don't believe that. Somebody else said it, not me. I'm just kidding.
Well, like I said, like I said, it's a worthy debate, one we have to have. And I think that, you know, in service to repair and healing and also solidarity amongst Black folks across all the lines. And so I have the faith that we as a community, we're going to have a rigorous debate, but we're going to figure it out and move forward together one way or another.
Yes, I agree. So back to you, Corey. And Ronnie, you actually did a great segue into the question I wanted to ask Corey specifically. And it's what work do you do specifically, Corey? And I talked about your work at Empower DC, but what harms do you think should be addressed in this reparations bill or should be studied by this future task force?
Yeah, I'll add, I guess, two quick addendums and then jump into harms.
Okay.
One is, as Ronnie mentioned, NCOBRA, I am the DC chapter co-chair for NCOBRA. And so I help
Some respect on his name, okay?
I don't know about all that, but I'm grateful to lead that organization and blessed to been sort of, be supported by, as Ronnie mentioned, the founding members of this national organization that has been doing this work since '87, and then the sort of predecessor institutions before then. I'm also, as you mentioned, at Empower, the director of the DC Legacy Project. And so that work sort of ties directly in with my research on the Black Broad Branch Project. Very briefly, two families used to own land in Chevy Chase, DC. They were displaced in 1928 to build a park and a school for a white community. They went from Chevy Chase, DC to Reno City, to Georgetown, to Southwest Washington, to Berry Farm over the course of 38 years, right? And so they went from being homeowners in what is today one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city to being public housing tenants in the most underserved and the poorest neighborhood in the city, right? And so this conversation about reparations for me is really dynamic. And I think the things that sort of come out to me are, one, obviously all 5 categories of reparations as defined by the International Commission of Jurists. That's restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and acknowledgement. Everything outlined in UN Resolution 6147, which is where our education piece comes from in the acknowledgement, compensation, and education model. But I think the thing that we sort of acknowledge in the bill's sort of process of revising that in the coalition, the thing that really came out for me was that there were no guarantees for reparations for people that have been displaced from the city altogether, right? There are entire communities that no longer live in Washington, D.C. As recent as 2019, Berry Farm was cleared again for another redevelopment project. And there are some people who unfortunately have passed on and are no longer with us. They've gone to join the ancestors. But there are some people who live in Waldorf, right? There's some people who live on the opposite coast, right? And so these people are forcibly scattered. And as a result, when we have these conversations on a sort of contemporary context about who gets to come back and benefit from a community, right, as Dr. Golash Boza was pointing out, right, it's incredibly difficult to do this organizing work when the community you're supposed to be working with is everywhere, right? They're everywhere and nowhere at the exact same time. And so in some way, we need to address people that have been displaced from the city altogether. I think the other thing for me that's really prescient is that the African-American cultural resources that are present in the city need to be preserved. That is the Mount Zion United Methodist Church, which is the oldest Black congregation in the district. There's a mosque that used to belong to the NOI up on Pennsylvania Avenue. That needs to be preserved. right? The Mount Zion Female Union Band Society cemeteries, which are the two oldest African-American burial grounds in the district, need to be preserved. The cemetery at Walter Pierce Park needs to be preserved, right? These historic cultural resources that have so long been either built on top of, paved over, forgotten, neglected, or in some cases taken from caretakers and auctioned off to developers, and they sort of end up in disparate hands until they finally make their way back to somebody who really wants to take care of it, but then they don't have the resources, right? And so the cultural resources of Black folk in the district need to be tended to, and that absolutely needs to be a part of the reparations process going forward.
Thank you so much for that. And so this is kind of different from the question that I asked Ronnie about the debates, but what is at stake with the passage of this reparations bill, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the thing that's at stake is an opportunity. I mean, obviously, there's sort of like the catch-all of righting wrongs and so on and so forth. But I think what's really at stake is whether or not the city, the mayor, or the city council are interested in taking seriously their commitment to racial equity. We can't have conversations about racial equity if you're not willing to commit to redefining the conversation on reparations. To Ronnie's point, we can't have conversations about reparations if we're not having conversations about what reparations looks like in a capitalist society, right? We can't have a conversation about reparations in a racist capitalist society in any meaningful way, right? In some contexts, we need to start thinking about deconstruction. So when I decided to run for office, everybody come back here and go, Corey is a deconstructionist. He wants to burn it all down. He said it here first. That said, I think that, when we get to the place where we're talking about what reparations can do for people, right? Which I think is sort of what you're getting to. It has an opportunity to empower entire generations of Black folk in the district going forward in a way that they've never been able to be empowered because the city wasn't willing to invest in them, right? I mentioned that family who went from Chevy Chase, DC to Berry Farm. And I also mentioned that Southeast DC used to be a segregated white community, right? That's not by mistake, right? Southeast Washington was a segregated community when they built Berry Farm in 1944, right? They put Berry Farm, a public housing project for Black people, right next to historic Anacostia, which was a segregated white community, with the intention of, one, penning in Black people in Berry Farm, but then more broadly, sort of putting a big public housing project of Black folk near historic Anacostia is an instance of blockbusting, right? They put this big project here, and what it does is scare all the white residents off, right? And because the infrastructure east of the river was already dilapidated, right? The sort of decision to disinvest further from Southeast Washington and continue constructing Upper Northwest and the rest of the city is one that coincides with white flight from Southeast Washington, D.C. And so this is an opportunity to Dr. Golash-Bose's point earlier. The city is going through this really scary wave of reinvestment in places that have been historically neglected. And that's great on the face, right? It's wonderful. And no one, I think, disagrees that money is needed in those places, right? But it shouldn't be that we can build a Planet Fitness, we can build arenas and stages and invest $500 million in propping up sports teams and everything of the like, but we can't spend that money to keep people there when those things are constructed, right? Those things have to go hand in hand. And so for me, I think that this is an opportunity to take the reparations argument away from the sort of conceptual and turn it into a public policy conversation so that we can get to a place where reparations is policy and we can start to have more meaningful conversations about how Black folk can benefit.
Wow, that was powerful. Thank you so much. Ronnie, I'm coming back to you now. And you had mentioned this earlier about task force, and I mentioned it in the introduction that the bill's purpose is to create a 9-member task force. It's not to administer reparations just yet. It's to create a task force to study and provide recommendations on reparations. So what is the importance of a task force, Ronnie?
Yeah, and if I could, Kenya, I just wanted to add one more thing to what's at stake, and then I'm
Okay,
gonna
yes,
2
of
seconds.
course, yes.
So the other thing that's at stake is, this is Washington, D.C. It's supposed to be the world seat for democracy.
It is.
We are not going to have no chance at a multiracial democracy if we don't get reparations. And to pick up where Corey left off, and to make reparations a reality, not just for Black folks, but to make reparative justice, come on, Patrice Sultan, to make reparative justice the way that we do justice, period. Right? And like everything else that has been good, well, I should say everything else, but a lot of things that have been good in this country, right? Black folks have kind of like led the way on this. Like, so if we can make reparations work for Black folks, we can certainly make that the font for how justice happens for everyone going forward. So anyway, so that's what our democracy is at stake. There are people, I'm not going to get political, but there are people I think who sense what is coming. And there are 10,000, 10 million of us, right? Marching and moving, and we will make reparations happen, and we will make it the way that justice happens, not just in the district, but in the country. That's what's at stake. We don't get to be a multiracial democracy and the example for the world unless we actually do right by Black folks. So anyway, I'm trying not to preach. All right, so anyway.
Keep it going. And one thing I want to add is, like you said, we are supposed to be the lead of democracy, and you have these other cities that are doing the work, and yet we're behind. I said it, DC's behind. Yep. And we need to pick it up, and we need to keep it going, and we need to continue to be the lead. And the only way to do it is to be the second city to administer reparations. Come on, follow Evanston's model. I'm ready.
Let's go. So real quick, I think that, as Corey said, there are many ways that reparations is happening at the local level, many issues even that are being confronted with the reparative justice lens. And because it's such a potentially, it's simple on one hand, let's just be very clear. And it's complex on the other hand. Like you asked me 10 minutes ago, well, actually it was 20 minutes ago because Corey talks so much, right? But it was 20 minutes ago. That's right. Corey had to take a shot. You asked me like, what are the debates? What are the things that people are talking about? That's just the 6 that I named here, right? And so the task force is important because it creates a venue for us to research, deliberate, and figure out what reparation looks like for Black people in DC in particular, right? It may look different than, matter of fact, I'm almost certain it'll look different than what it looks like for Black folks in California, right? And so there'll be some through lines. And so we need researchers, we need economists, and Corey really has been pushing everybody around this one. We need folks who can trace their lineage back, there's the word, back to the families who have been harmed, either by slavery or some other trauma. We need folks who have the lived experience of trauma, whether it's like way back or somebody, as our sister Taylor Nouvelle from, I forget the organization, folks who are walking out of jail right now, right? Out of the system of incarceration. And so we need like a space where it's cross-sector, cross-generational, cross-discipline, where folks are coming together to figure out, well, what does reparations look like for us in DC? And if I could, Kenya, I'd like to make a motion. I think Dr. Tonya needs to be on that. I think Dr. Tonya needs to be on that commission. I know there's folks on here who might have some power to do that, but if I could get a second, we could just make this happen today.
Doctor, he's nominating you. Do you accept your nomination to the task force, Doctor?
Of course. That'll be part of the reparations. Do the work.
No, so you mentioned economists, Ronnie, and you mentioned some other roles. Who else would you like to see on the task force? Because the bill lays out, who can be appointed and how many people, who the mayor can appoint, all that good stuff. But what kind of people would you like to see on the task force?
Well, so all the folks that I mentioned, I left one group out. And there are many folks on this call who are part of the DC Reparations Coalition, and many, many other folks who are organizing, agitating, supporting community, all kinds of things. Those folks who have like the real kind of time examples and experience of what's happening in the district, they need to be on the commission. Now, we had a debate and we've been working wonderfully. I think there's some folks from Councilmember McDuffie's office, maybe even on the line. We've had a very good relationship with the office. we made some recommendations and about who should be on the task force. And you won't be surprised that the DC Reparations Coalition, we bias toward fewer politicians and more community folks, right? And so, and we're in negotiation trying to figure out what that looks like. But I think that Councilmember McDuffie and his team recognize that we feel pretty strongly about the fact that community voice is represented heavily and significantly on the task force. One other thing, Kenya, that I left out when you asked me about advocacy. So the DC coalition has been very active in meeting with the council people.
Mhm.
We've met with just about all of them. There are 3 who right now have been a little squirrely and haven't met with us. And so I don't want to call their name right now.
Don't do it.
No,
I ain't
I'm not
trying
gonna
to
do
get
it. I'm not gonna do it.
DC Justice
But-
Lab in trouble.
Patrice is over there saying, say it, right? No, we're not going to call their name now, but we're going to give them about another 30 or 45 days. And if not, we're
Then
going
you're
to
gonna put them on blast. You're gonna put
we're
them
going
on.
to give
Okay.
them the old school Georgetown Hoya full court press
Ooh.
make sure that they meet with us. The good news, though, the really good news, Corey, Kelly, who's on the call, a number of other folks, we've met with these council people, and to a person, unanimous support for the task force, the bill. Of course, they want to see the final version, but we're starting to get some early warning signals that it's trending in the right direction. And again, the advocacy work that we've been doing, a lot of it, Patrice has been working with you, of course, Kenya, on the side to like say, okay, here's what we need to do. Here are the talking points. Here's how you talk to these people, and don't trigger them yet. And so thank you again, Patrice and Kenya, for that guidance. But we're making really good progress, and we're going to keep going back to them until they say yes officially to the bill.
Okay, thank you. Before I ask these last 2 questions to everyone on the panel, I like what you said about reparations looking different in this different cities. So reparations may look different in Los Angeles, California than it would in Washington, D.C., or in Evanston, or in Asheville, or Detroit. And I really do think that that is important to highlight, because although I feel like any reparations program should meet the 5 conditions that the UN lays out, but the harms may not look identical, and that's okay. The point is to repair the harm. Don't do it again. It's not going to happen again. We're not doing that. And to make sure that moving forward, we can have a multiracial and I would say harmonious community in a capitalist society. So thank you again for that, Ronnie. So these are the last 2 questions that I have for everyone on the panel. And don't act shy, because when we met on Monday, it was juicy. It was a debate. So I want that same energy, y'all. I want that same energy. So this last question that I have is, what current attacks on DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and critical race theory, the bill's opponents are apparent. However, for those who are stuck in between, or in other words, neutral, what would you say to convince them that reparations are needed and needed now? And anyone can go first.
I'm down for jumping out there since I think it got juicy because of me.
Yeah, it did.
I think the point I made on Friday was that it just was a non-issue for me, DEI in DC. I don't see people really complaining about DEI and critical race theory in DC. Granted, like I've been doing reparations work across the country, and I've sort of just come back home to DC to sort of pay attention a little more. But I've been doing like curriculum building for this history of folks that goes back to 1773 and 1754, and walking through displacement of Black folk in Washington from several communities. And not once have I've presented at schools in Georgetown, Chevy Chase, a couple of private schools up there, Georgetown Day School, we did one.
Now you're just bragging. First, it started off with you traveling across the country and you creating this curriculum, and we get it. And you're only 24 and you're smart and brilliant. Okay, we get it, Corey. No,
yeah, I didn't even answer like that. You know what I mean? But the
frequent flyer miles. He got frequent flyer miles and all that stuff.
Look, somebody else got the freaking flyer miles. I ain't buy them tickets. Anyway, that said, I say that to say, like, in the spaces that I run in and the work that I've been doing, I have not been able to see any real resistance to like teaching history, right? Because that's really what the whole DEI and critical race issue across the country is like teaching objective and real history. I think the issue for me that I've run into is racist sentiments that are under the guise of like, oh, but we want this area to look the same, right? We don't want things to change, right? When they already changed. That's why it looks this way, right? Like it's those sorts of things that get beyond issues of DEI and critical race theory and get at the heart of the sort of community development fights that are taking place in the city. That is where I see a bit more resistance. And I think we're as a coalition, maybe we should be focusing our efforts.
And I have, to follow up on that, also I've been doing a tour around the city. And I've been talking to a lot of communities in DC, taking this show on the road, basically what I told y'all earlier, just in a little lengthier format. And one of the, I'd say pretty consistently what comes up in the conversation when I'm engaging with the white residents of DC is they're just like, yeah, but not all white people, right? And so what I think is interesting about that is kind of unraveling what racism means or what racial inequality means. And I think one way to get at it is just to point out, like, if you bought a house in Chevy Chase in 1980 and sent your kids to Lafayette Elementary School, Deal Junior High, and Jackson Reed High School, then called Wilson, you personally benefited from reparations for white people. Right? Like, and it's a lot. A lot of money was put into those neighborhoods and those schools, and that at the expense of Black people. So anyway, so I think kind of recognizing that if you were of the same stat, had the same set of resources and were Black and purchased a home just on the other side of the park in Petworth in 1980, you would not be benefiting from that same set of resources, and you wouldn't have the same amount of wealth today. So I think kind of reframing the debate of like, white people already got reparations. So now it's Black people's turn, and helping people to see that. I think that might have some resonance in DC anyway. It is definitely a very liberal city. Yeah, but there's other ways to reframe the debate for that audience.
Before I get to you, Ronnie, I think that's very interesting because there is like a sentiment from, our white brothers and sisters that not all white people have created the harm that calls for reparations. And I think there are some white people who feel like reparations are an attack on them personally. But in actuality, I think that one of the benefits of reparations is to bring together communities that have been kind of divided because of racial tensions and stuff from the past. So I think that that was very important that you brought that up, that a lot of white people, although they aren't outright racist, they do believe that, well, I'm not the cause of it, so why should I be involved in making sure that these people benefit from reparations? So thank you for that, Tanya.
Yeah, so I rarely am on the opposite side of an idea than Corey Shaw Jr., because it's actually dangerous to be there, particularly around this issue, because he's so well informed. But I would, so two things about DEI, and Corey, I hear you when you say like you're not hearing it directly when you're in the neighborhoods. And I think that's really, I want to underscore, that's really where we should be listening and taking our cues. But two things about DEI. I don't use that language. I don't use DEI language. Matter of fact, I think I just heard Cornel West say this. I've been saying this for years. DEI is a sanitized like version of what we're really talking about. We're talking about racial and economic. And by the way, if we do it right, and gender justice, right? And so so the diversity in the way I look at it, when I see that word, it triggers me because diversity is a word that was created by white people to actually help them understand how they were related to the dark world around them. We didn't create that word, they did, right? And so diversity really keeps whiteness at the center. So I don't really deal with it. And I think diversity, equity, and inclusion really is a way to kind of like make palatable what we're really trying to get at: racial justice, economic justice, and reparations. So that just top of the line, some thoughts on DEI. But to Corey's point, not hearing it, I understand that, Corey. And again, going back to, and we talked about this on the call, DC is a federal district, right? And so it may not be this idea of like the backlash and anti-wokeness and all that stuff that is coming out of particular sectors of our political economy. It may not be on the streets of DC, but it certainly is in the places, Congress, right, where we may have to negotiate this bill and its passage. And so I think we've got to really pay attention to the national scene and how that the national kind of clapback against racial justice, that's the frame I'm going to use, right? How it might show up in the context of us trying to pass this bill. And so I really do appreciate this question. And as we've been meeting with the council people, they also have been raising this question about like, well, how are we going to negotiate if and when we get to that place where we may have to negotiate with a Congress that is not just like ambivalent, but is like hostile, right, to anything like this. So I do think we need to pay attention to it. And we need to have a strategy to deal with it. For the very same reason, HR 40 has been hung up for decades, right? And so I think it would be a lost opportunity if we didn't pay attention to it. It's certainly in our face, even if it's not, as Corey said, and I agree with you, on the streets where like the people are experiencing the harm right now in DC.
So you didn't like my usage of DEI. You didn't have to read me like that.
No, it wasn't you. That's the prevailing term. That's the prevailing term. That's the prevailing term. That's the prevailing term.
I'm just kidding. So I actually had another question before the last question. Aha, I got y'all. This last question before the last question is, I've been noticing another group that's not against reparations necessarily, but they don't feel like it's going to happen in their lifetime, and they're kind of been discouraged, and that's Black people. Like I've noticed, and I've heard from Black people my age, older Black people, and they're just like, I mean, of course, reparations are needed, but we've been fighting for reparations for years. Is it actually going to happen? So, what do you say to our people about reparations happening and happening soon? Ronnie, I know you want to go first. I saw your face.
No, I probably should not go first on this question.
Doctor,
All right.
did you want to go? Oh,
I'll just say, the struggle always gets us somewhere.
mm-hmm.
So whether or not, whatever we're looking at, we don't know, first of all, what reparations is going to look like in the US, but this conversation is already getting us somewhere. So I would just invite people to join the conversation, to be a part of the conversation, so that we can together disentangle the possibilities.
I like that. What did you say? You said the struggle. Say that again.
I think I said the struggle will always get us somewhere.
Okay, I'm gonna use that as a IG post caption. So I'm gonna quote you, just so you know. And Ronnie, what you got to say?
I think there's a movement phrase that captures what Dr. Tanya is saying, "A luta continua," and the movement continues, right? Movement presses on. So I have a little bit of a different take. For folks who are like, that'll never happen, they are not crazy, right? I mean, Black folks have been profoundly and consistently disappointed, bait and switched, lied to, traumatized, used, right? Since those of us who were dragged here, we were dragged here. And so I heard somebody say recently, I don't remember who it was, Black people are very pragmatic in the political system. We really are. And so if there are folks out there who are saying reparations will never happen, you know what? I'm not even going to fight them. Mm-hmm. But for those of us who believe, those of us who have the energy and maybe even the privilege to fight, Kenya, Patrice, I'm sorry, but I got to say it this way. We got to fight our ass off.
I told you no cussing.
I know, but I couldn't help it. I'm a cussing preacher. We have to fight our ass off. And we got to fight in a way that makes them believe, that gives them hope, right? Like the professor said, they see us making progress. And when they actually see something happening that's concrete, that's real, that they can reach out and touch, when that check starts hitting people's bank accounts, right? Whatever it's going to take, like, we got to give them a reason to believe. And I will say, for Black folks who don't believe, they're not crazy. I think they're actually sane. There's no reason for Black folks to believe anything good coming out of the system, given the harm that has been exacted on us. Look at the Compromise of 1877, right? So the North wins the Civil War. They bring the troops into the South to make sure that Black folks are protected. And I don't know what election it was. I don't even remember who was running. Y'all know, y'all the historians. The North wanted somebody to be the president. The South said, okay, he can be the president if y'all get rid of them troops. And the North took those troops out of the South and they started lynching Black people immediately. Why should we trust this country to do anything right? Right? So for folks who don't believe, I'm with it, right? But for those of us who are fighting, we believe. And we got to fight in a way so they say, you know what? I believe too. And it's Vernon Johns. He was the pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church before Martin Luther King Jr. showed up. Vernon Johns said, if you see a good fight, get in it, right? And so we got to fight the good fight. When we fight the good fight, they'll get in it. They'll get in it.
Y'all saw the stink face, right? Y'all know y'all saw the stink face. When he did the stink face, he's serious, and he started.
I feel my help coming on.
Like, come on now, come on! Don't make I'll get Pentecostal on here, okay? I see my nana clapping. Okay, we're gonna take it to church. Thank you for that. And Corey, did you have something that you wanted to say?
It's a tough act to follow, man. I ain't got an organ over here, nothing. I mean, I think the only thing I would add, I guess, is, it wasn't that long ago that the Black folk couldn't walk down Pearl Street, right? And it's only because people fought that we now have the freedom, the liberty, the ability to do that, right? It wasn't that long ago that Black folk couldn't own homes. For that matter, it wasn't that long ago that Black women could own property, right? Women in general, for that matter, right? And it's only because somebody got up and fought and said, this is wrong, we can do better. And so I think at a minimum, I understand people being discouraged. I know, Kenya, I think we had this conversation in passing. But if you think that there's something we could be doing better, to Ronnie's point, if you see a fight, you got to fight. Get in it. Get to it.
Get to it. Wow. Okay, this is my last question for real. No more surprises. I'm serious. So you said if you see a good fight, get in it, which I agree with wholeheartedly. So what advocacy still needs to be done to push this bill past the finish line?
I mean, on one hand, I think Patrice dropped the little letter writing campaign for your council members in the chat. So go ahead and sign that. I'm also adhere to the rule of not calling out names, but if you see some people in particular wards, might be the ones in Upper Northwest, give them a nudge, as has been noted in the chat. Give them a nudge. Stop them in the hallway while they're walking to get coffee. Catch them while they're about to walk into the Wilson building, or when they're walking home for a hearing, and just ask a question. I did it at an event recently, and it bared fruit, right? And so I think that's the one thing that I think people could do in their sort of everyday life is make yourself heard.
Was that your political way of saying when you see them is on site? No, without the violent connotation, of course. Just asking. But I do agree. If you see certain people, no names being said, I do think having a conversation with them does go a long way. And so I'm gonna let Dr. Tanya and Reverend, come on, Rev. I'm gonna let them finish this off, and then we wanna go to next steps and questions from the audience.
I think, we need support, groundswell support. I think exactly what Corey said, having conversations, not just with council members, but with anybody. Because this is how it happens, is having conversation, breaking down the myths. Because there's so much mystery and myths around reparations, which is part of the counter struggle, right? Is basically making it seem like it's this impossible, crazy thing when really it's just a conversation that we're trying to have at this point.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm campaigning for Councilmember McDuffie, But I really do. I think, like you said, this is the third time this bill has been forward. And so really want to celebrate that. I think some of the advocacy work that needs to happen, one, so DC government has stepped up. And maybe the task force will figure this out, but there are some corporations out there who also participated in the harm. And we need to figure out what that harm was and how much it cost. And so, so I think the advocacy also needs to, it needs to be laced with some research, of course. And then I think that organizations like NCOBRA, like DMV Freedmen, like Empower DC, Corey, the African American Redress Network, because they're doing work here in the area. I think that that's where the real advocacy is happening. And so, to Professor's point, the public groundswell that we need, that really comes by organizing and political education and public debate. That's the work that needs to happen. And we need for our corporate community, because we know they stole a bunch. So they should start paying reparations right now, right? Our corporate community and our philanthropic community, we need for them to start putting money on the line for these organizations that are actually doing the work at the grassroots to educate the public, so they have the resources they need to create the groundswell we'll need to pass the bill.
Wow, thank you so much. This has been such a great and insightful conversation. I want to give a round of applause to our panelists, Corey, Dr. Tanya, and Reverend Ronnie. So everyone, if y'all can just go on and clap for them. Thank you so, so much. And thank you to everyone who showed up. I know people have busy schedules and they work. And to do this after work during the week, I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the fact that we are having these types of conversations. And like Patrice mentioned in the chat, thank you to Donnie, who works with Kenyon McDuffie, the council member who introduced this bill in particular, for joining the call and for her work that she's doing, and everyone else who's in the community that's advocating for reparations and advocating to push this bill forward. So I'm going to go into next steps, and then I will all go into questions that the audience may have. So next steps, I would say, I know Dr. Tanya has an event coming up May 23rd. So did you want to speak briefly about that? And I believe it was posted in the chat.
Yes, we don't have the formal advertisement yet, but you can put it on your calendars, May 23rd, 5:30 p.m. at the University of California, Washington Center. We'll follow up with an email to everyone. But basically what we're doing is bringing 6 scholars from California to talk about reparations work that they've been doing, and for them to engage in conversations here with local experts.
Okay, thank you. And then Corey, you mentioned on Monday that you and Empower DC, I believe, are doing a short series at Martha's Table. Is that?
That's in the works, but
That's in the works, okay.
there is, I guess, 2 quick events. There's one on May 9th, Storming Caesar's Palace. There will be a screening of that film at the MLK Library. It's being hosted by the National Women's History Museum. We're also looking to collect oral histories from BIPOC women in the movements. So if you're out here doing the work, please show up. We'd love to talk to you for like 15 minutes. And then on May 10th at the Undesigned the Red Line exhibit at Cleveland Park Library, there will be a screening of the Berry Farm film and a talk back with the audience about reparations. Yeah.
Okay. And DC Justice Lab will make sure to advertise these events on our page. And then as far as the call to action goes, for our DC community members, DC residents, we would like if you signed this call to action, sending this letter to your council member, again, urging them to push this bill forward and advocating for the importance and the need for this bill in Washington, D.C. So again, thank you, everyone. And I will now move to questions, which Maya will be facilitating. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're so glad to have everyone here. My name is Maya, and I am just blown away by all of the brilliance that came through on this call. I am so glad that we were able to put this together. And if you haven't had a chance already, please take some time to drop any questions you have in the chat. We already have one from Dewan. But any other questions, now's the time to drop them in the chat. And so the question from Dewan is, I move in food justice circles. How can I tie that conversation to the reparations conversation beyond the reclamation of stolen land?
You know, one thing that comes to mind when you say that is thinking about it really was government policies that led to the spread of diabetes in Black and Indigenous communities in around the nation. So I've always thought about this, and like if government policies created an epidemic of diabetes, then government policies can undo this epidemic of diabetes and other epidemics that predominantly affect Black Indigenous communities. So anyway, so I think looking at the work that's been done on diabetes would be one place to start, but you really could start with any sort of they're not called foodborne illnesses, but illnesses that are exacerbated by the stuff they put in our foods.
Thanks, Tanya. Does anyone else want to take a stab at that question? Corey, I saw you come off mute. Don't be shy now.
No, I think the one thing, and this is something that like I've always wanted to like pilot research on, is that, you know, we know for example that there were like delis and things like that east of the river prior to the sort of white flight from Southeast Washington. There were also like local markets and things like that. And so the question that I would want to sort of dig into is what businesses were Black folk allowed to own at the time? And why is it that at the same moment that we see white flight from Southeast DC, the only thing really popping up in the area as far as stores, like there's like mechanics and things like that, a couple of little markets here and there, but the mass majority of things popping up east of the river are liquor stores. Right. And so the thing that I'd want to sort of see research on is whether or not there's a correlation between what Black folk could and could not do in terms of property ownership and policy. And then in turn, does that sort of have any lasting effect, or has it had a lasting effect on why, for example, the two grocery stores that we have east of the river, Giant and Safeway, one of which routinely carries spoiled milk, and the other which seems like they're trying to close. Right? Why is it that we're sort of stuck with these two versus a sort of array of other sorts of markets like you would see and you do see in areas like Chevy Chase and in Georgetown?
Yeah, y'all are preaching. I feel like it's so nice to see so many different people coming together that all focus on different things. And so I think that like y'all have been talking about this, but this is definitely like a racial justice and economic justice. Like, heck, I have a background in public health, and I can definitely see the public health connections. Like reparations has been and will continue to be such an impactful conversation, an important one to have, and one that we can't lose sight of while we're doing the active work of organizing people around things. Ronnie, anything you want to add?
No, I think what you just said is really how reparations, it's so easy for the conversation, and Maya, I don't even know if I'm answering your questions. If I'm not, give it right back to me. How it can be quarantined, if you will, to the time of the enslavement. And I just want to make sure that that doesn't sound like I'm minimizing that. That is the most horrific crime against humanity imaginable. 400 plus years long. And if you ascribe to the paradigm of slavery by another name, it is still ongoing. And so the notion of reparations really, I think slavery is kind of the center point, but like it just, there's so many ways that harm has happened. And so hearing you even talk about public health and the connection there, and as professor, as I think about diabetes and sugar, so my wife is from Jamaica, and one of the big crops during the enslavement period was sugarcane. And so the very thing that was killing Black people picking sugar or harvesting sugar during the enslavement is now come back to kill us in our very bloodstreams, right? And so I just, the kind of tragic irony of that. I don't even know if irony is the right word, but like, yeah, these things just keep killing over and over and over again. And so we have to think about reparations in a structural, systemic way, much like repair happens in the body. The body is intelligent enough to know that when there is something happening in the body sends an abundance of resources, even if it has to shut down another part of the body, right? It sends resources to where the harm is, because the body knows if we don't fix this harm, the whole body could be at risk. And so if we could ever get to that, if we could ever get our political economy to have that embedded in our nervous system, then we can address these myriad of things that, Maya, that you're talking about, that we talked about on the panel.
And if you think about corner stores, just to pick that up, like the corner stores, what do they carry? They carry potato chips, sodas, hot mama sausages, Slim Jims, right? All these foods. And the reason why they carry those foods is because the way their package allows them for a long shelf life. And that has to do with the economic structure of the store, the neighborhood. Like, it's not by accident that these particular goods are what's available in stores, and what kids grow up eating, and that has lifelong consequences.
Now I want a hot mama sausage. Dang, sound good.
I haven't had one in like 30 years, but
Do you think we have time for one more question? Or I don't know. If people have questions, you can always send them to me at my email. I'll put it in the chat and I can get them to the speakers. But again, thank you so much for this wonderful webinar. This will be recorded. So if you want, you can share it with your other colleagues and community members. Let me put my email in the chat. Okay. So yeah, if you have any other questions, send them to me, please. Thank you to everyone who showed up. Thank you to the speakers. Again, you were phenomenal. This was great, energetic, and I can't wait for this conversation to continue. So again, thank you so much. And I look
Thanks,
forward to
everyone.
speaking to everyone soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kenya. You did.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Maya, yeah.
Bye.